Tonight on Primetime, 5 years into Russia's war on Ukraine, public resolve tested, diplomacy cautiously re-emerging, and European capitals witnessing renewed displays of solidarity on the streets this week. Support holds firm across Europe. A very good evening. Ukraine is marking 4 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion, with a nationwide moment of silence, ceremonies in Kyiv and Bucha, and renewed pledges of support from European leaders.
In Kyiv, the day began quietly. Soldiers lowered military flags, traffic stopped. People stood with candles and portraits in their hands, marking time by what they have lost. 4 years on, the war remains Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II.
Putin has not achieved his goals. He has not broken Ukrainians. He has not won this war. We have preserved Ukraine, and we will do everything to secure peace and justice.
But the anniversary was not only about remembrance, it was also a message to Ukraine's allies. European Union leaders were in Kiev joining Zelensky at St. Sophia Cathedral in what officials described as a show of unity as the war enters its 5th year. At the same time, Zelensky addressed the European Parliament, urging lawmakers to back a proposed €90 billion support package over 2 years, calling it essential for Ukraine's security and resilience.
Right now, there is an important decision on the table. €90 billion in support for Ukraine over 2 years. This is a real financial guarantee of our security and our resilience, and it must be implemented.
European leaders had hoped to move quickly on the loan and a fresh sanctions package, but Hungary has kept its veto, exposing divisions inside the bloc at a critical moment in the war. In Kyiv, leaders from the so-called Coalition of the Willing also met discussing continued military support and tougher pressure on Moscow.
We must continue to help Ukraine defend herself and not get drawn into the idea that because there are talks going on, that somehow that means that we don't have to do the hard yards of helping Ukraine to defend herself. We know that Putin is dragging his heels.
I am relatively skeptical that peace can be achieved in the short term. First, we must continue our support, and we must increase pressure on Russia, including work on the 20th package of sanctions.
Moscow, meanwhile, says the conflict has evolved into a broader confrontation with the West and insists it will continue until Russia's objectives are met.
The special military operation continues. At the same time, Russia remains open to achieving its goals through political and diplomatic means, and work in this direction is ongoing. In any case, Russia's interests will be ensured.
Diplomatic contacts between the sides are ongoing, but no agreement has been announced.
Okay, let's bring in journalist Andrei Brashcheko now, joining us from Torino in Italy as demonstrations continue across Europe 5 years into this war. Andrea, very good to see you there. Thank you very much for joining us on Prime Time. 5 years on then, are Europeans still emotionally invested in this war in precisely the same way as they were earlier, do you think?
Hi Guy, good evening and thank you for having me. I think they definitely are, although it varies from country to country. The war feels much closer to the Baltic states, to Scandinavia or Poland than it does to the part of Western Europe or Southern Europe like Greece or Portugal. We have seen today at the leadership level today's visit of Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa to Kyiv together with other European leaders, again, mainly from Baltic states and Scandinavia. It carries a significant political weight. The European Union has invested around €194 billion in support of Ukraine and is now effectively replacing the United States as the main donor, and this is a major shift. At the same time, as we've seen, difficulties remain. Just today, in the recent days, we have seen Viktor Orban Hungary blocking through a veto a crucial 90 billion euro loan package for Ukraine, funding that is, let's say, vital for keeping Ukraine's finances afloat. If the EU wants to appear strong and reliable, and the European Council wants that too, it needs to speed up and better secure these procedures. And this is not the moment for division, I think.
And not the moment for division, as you say, but within Italy itself, have you sensed that any pressure when it comes to the scale of the economic commitment? I mean, Italy, like many other countries in Europe, has got its own challenges domestically, economic pressures, different points of view about the future trajectory of the country. Has that sort of reshaped this debate at all?
I think we need to distinguish between the political leadership and the public opinion. Among European governments, support has generally remained solid, but at the level of society, divisions are clearly growing in the last years. Because 4 years of war inevitably lead to fatigue, not only in Ukraine, but also in the European countries. Russian disinformation has also played its role, I think. And to be fair, Kyiv has made his own mistakes as well. Corruption scandals have damaged trust in the Ukrainian government and in President Zelensky too, both domestically and abroad. And it is very crucial for the support and military and humanitarian aid. In Italy, this debate is particularly sensitive. The country, as you said, has faced economic stagnation for decades. The country has its own problem, and the spike in energy prices after 2022 hits hard still. Many expected a few years ago that Prime Minister Meloni and his government to take a less supportive pro-Ukrainian stance. But despite its limitation, the Italian government has remained supportive of Ukraine, taking a clearly pro-Atlantic stance, following the European Union in that.
It's a very interesting point you make there, because there were many analysts that assumed that the Meloni government would pull away from the sort of the conventional wisdom in Brussels. That, as you say, on this issue, that hasn't happened. There's renewed talk now of diplomacy. We know there have been some successes, particularly around financial support. But where are we when it comes to credible diplomatic progress?
I think the Geneva talks are moving very slowly. The Ukrainian delegation has described them as difficult but business-like. This is a very diplomatic way of saying that progress is slow. The core issues remain far from being resolved. Territorial. The Russian position itself appears unchanged. Just today, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that the war will continue until Russia achieves its objectives. Exactly a year ago, Donald Trump was accusing Zelensky of not wanting to sit at the negotiation table. Now, I think it seems clear to most observers that if it is Moscow that is only pretending to engage constructively. My impression is that the Kremlin is still buying time, possibly hoping for internal collapse in Ukraine, given Kyiv's challenges with recruitment, but also public finances, if this EU loan is continuing to be blocked. That say, Russia's own internal situation is not as stable as it may appear, despite the authoritarian consolidation of the last 4 years and the war economy in place. We all remember that Donald Trump once promised to end this war in 24 hours. I think he realized within days of taking office that this was unrealistic.
Yeah.
The fact that negotiations have dragged, yes.
No, but just on that point, on that point of the duration, because I think it's very important. We've, as you rightly say, we've heard there Putin's statements about, this will frankly end when I decide it will end, when I've achieved my objectives. But in a sense, we've also heard that position validated to some degree by Michel Macron, who was sort of admitting, well, he's sceptical that anything's really going to change anytime soon. Is that not a bit of a fatalistic position to take? Everybody is assuming that this now will sadly continue for the foreseeable future.
Yes, I think that many people and the governments themselves have grown to this war almost as if it were a natural disaster, and that is deeply troubling. I think in Europe, attention has also shifted because of the other major crises in the world, including what happened in Gaza in the last 2 years. In Ukraine itself, there is still anger toward the Russian invasion, but there is also growing exhaustion. But the sense of never-ending war is taking its toll, and this happens in Russia too. For the Russian public opinion, it's difficult to gauge what's happening there, I think. The recent restriction on Telegram by the Kremlin may signal an attempt to silence pro-war military bloggers ahead of a possible change in the war's trajectory, perhaps even an eventual settlement, but this is very difficult to predict. I think and I believe that all sides here, Russia, Ukraine, and Europe, I believe all sides are preparing their population for some form of change after years of highly militarized rhetoric that may now be difficult to manage within the public opinion. We will see what prevails. Personally, I expect some kind of breaking point before the end of the year, but at this stage, predictions still remains extremely uncertain. I think it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen.
It's very interesting what you said there about Russian public opinion. We're going to be talking to our next guest about that. In terms of public opinion within Europe, do you get any sense, and it's terrible to even say this, but given how many people have tragically died and suffered appallingly, but do you get any sense that there's almost like becoming a sense in which people are tired of this as subject matter within Europe, that there's a risk that actually the appetite to support might diminish with each sort of 6-month, 12-month period that goes by?
Yeah, I think this anniversary recalls, of course, what happened 4 years ago, and at the beginning there was a remarkable unity. True, it was uncertain at the beginning which kind of support Europe will take to Ukraine. I think this was fueled by the shock of seeing a large-scale war in Europe, something many thought belonged to the past, even if the Balkans will remind us otherwise, because it happened just in the 90s. In those first months of the war, even pro-Russian or anti-Ukrainian politicians in Europe were cautious about openly criticizing Ukraine and its resistance. Today, the issue has become far more politicized and increasingly instrumentalized for electoral purposes. And it's not just Hungary under Orban or Slovakia under Robert Fico. In Germany and France, right-wing forces advocating concession to Moscow and an end to support for Ukraine are gaining ground. Even in the UK, Nigel Farage's party is leading in the poll, and that could matter since Prime Minister of UK Starmer had positioned himself alongside Macron as the forefront of the so-called coalition of the willing. I think this coalition will be tested by election over the next 3 or 4 years, and even if the war in Ukraine were to freeze earlier than that, what happens politically in France, Germany, and the UK will be decisive for Kyiv's future and also for Europe's long-term relationship with Moscow.
Andrea, great to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis.
Thank you very much for having me again, and greetings to all of yours. Goodbye.
Okay, let's now bring in Ksenia Kirilova, Russian society expert at the Jamestown Foundation, to explore how society inside Russia is processing the conflict as it moves into its 5th year. Ksenia, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Very pleased to have you here on the show tonight. I'm very interested in the psychology of this. We were talking before with Andrea about public opinion and how it's sort of shaped and how it develops and changes over time. There are some observers that say that Russians are aware of the war, have their own points of view, obviously, but tend to experience it now at somewhat of a distance. Is that true? And if so, could you explain why you think that's the case?
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. And yes, you are right. Now, Russian society tries, at least a majority of Russian society, tries to distance themselves from the war. We need to understand that, yes, unfortunately, we can observe some strong psychological need of majority of Russian people to justify this war for themselves. When the full-scale invasion started 4 years ago, it was a shock for Russian society, even for pro-Putin part of this society. And but people understand, people realize that they cannot change anything, especially with the highest level of repression in Russia. Probably you know that any word against the war could lead to a long-term imprisonment in Russia.
Yes.
So in this situation, people tried to maintain at least an illusion of normal life. So they tried to normalize the war for themselves to justify it. And the first psychological need was to find any explanation. And people, frankly, don't care how logical and plausible this explanation is. For them, it was just to they needed to persuade themselves that every new strike on their normal life was inevitable and undertaken for their own good.
And
so,
just on that, Ksenia, just because it's very, very interesting what you say. In terms of that sort of almost that psychological armour, if you like, that many kind of citizens are putting up, how kind of impenetrable do you think it is? Because if you look at the lists, you know, on the one hand, you've got the United States, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, Japan, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, almost every European country, all saying they think the Russian invasion was wrong. On the other side, you've essentially got North Korea and Iran. I mean, how do people interpret this? Do they think that just all of those countries have been brainwashed in some way?
It's really amazing things that human psychology can do. It's really, it was shocking even for me. But Russian propaganda itself is very contradictory. It's create different explanation, not only for pretext of the war. In the beginning, for example, Russian propaganda invented different pretexts why they had to start the war, had to attack Ukraine. And a couple of months later, they even didn't tell that Russia attacked Ukraine. And they said that Ukraine and the West attacked Russia. So, and people managed to change not only their opinion, even their memories in a couple of months. It shows really a strong psychological need to believe in what they want to believe. So yes, it's probably, it looks crazy for any normal people how it's possible to believe that the whole world is against you. But it's interesting thing that people don't want, it's just impossible for them to live with terrible truth. It's unbearable for them and they try to avoid it. Yes. On the one hand. It's very obviously, for example, Russian people could criticize the war and Putin himself when they talk among themselves on some details, for example, about mobilization and other processes. But when they talk about international relationship, they started to justify this war. Because when they talk inside Russia, they consider themselves as individuals. But when we talk about international relationship, Russian and Ukraine relationship, Russian people started to perceive themselves as a part of Russian states. So they don't want to be a part of aggressors. They don't want to feel this as a personal fault. They don't want to be blamed for this. And justifying Putin, they try to justify themselves. And now we see another evolution in Russian, considering the war. In Russian mentality. If in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the majority of Russian people needed to find any explanation for this war, they needed to justify it. Even in some crazy explanation, it doesn't matter, not plausible. But now they even don't try to explain anything. It's just a last level of adaptation when they just consider the war like a natural disaster, like a natural phenomenon like snow and rain. The war just happened for them. They even don't want to think about reasons of the war, and you are right, they try to avoid any information of this war. They try to pretend that they live the normal life, and they try to avoid any additional information about the war. It's like a background. The war is something that just happened. They try not to think why it happened and what they can do. They just try to pretend that nothing changed in their life.
They try not to think about what's happened. Very, very interesting indeed. When there were many political analysts and pollsters near the start of the war 5 years ago that made the point that actually, you know, war can increase the popularity of many leaders of many countries. But Russia is more sensitive to that politically than perhaps some other countries. Is there a sense that Putin's popularity as a direct result of this war is still continuing to track reasonably positively?
I wouldn't call this popularity. Yes, the war definitely helped Putin to maintain his power, and it probably was the one main reason why he started the war, just to increase his rating and to have ability to maintain his power and to avoid people discontent. But it's not probably about popularity, it's about some kind of archetypes, yes, which are from Soviet time. People believe that they have to support the government. They don't make any difference between country and government and even themselves in difficult times. So there was difficult times. And propaganda also works. Yes, people want to believe in this, but as a result, they really start to believe in this propaganda, and they believe that they are surrounded by enemies. They probably could criticize Putin, but they think that he is the only person who could protect them from these enemies, otherwise Russia will be destroyed.
It's very interesting. And Ksenia, can I just probe a little bit on that, because it's very interesting indeed. Do you think, I mean, what are people more scared of, do you think? Are they more scared of retribution from the government, were they to speak out and express an alternative opinion? Or is it more the negative opinion, retribution from their peers in the community? Which one do you think is repressing, controlling people more?
In Russia, mostly government. But unfortunately, it's impossible to separate public opinion and government prosecution, because some people who really ideologically believe in propaganda, they became snitches. They denounce for their neighbors, for their even relatives, and FSB also uses these reports from ordinary people in its repression system. So people are afraid to say something even in private conversations. People started not to trust each other because the risk of such kind of report is very high, especially with such level of repression. And we already have a lot of examples when any denunciation was enough for a person to receive a long, many years prison term without any other evidence, just a testimony from witness. And sometimes these witnesses are FSB provocators.
Ksenia,
especially tries to extract some watches, wrong watches from other person.
Yes.
So yes, people know how FSB works. They are afraid to tell the truth, even to their friends.
Ksenia, we really appreciate your analysis. I think getting this particular type of insight has really helped the overall analysis of this story. So we thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories of the day with Andy Mioch. Stay tuned.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
We have a dependency on the Russian economy, as we do with any economy, because we currently import a large volume of goods.
Armenia has always been Russia's closest and best friend in every matter. But today, Russia has abandoned and dumped Armenia.
During the 2020 war, we were in strategic relations with Russia. Not only did they not help, but they didn't help even when requested.
They brought in gasoline from Azerbaijan, and the price dropped by 50 drams. When you fill a 20-liter tank, that is a saving of 1,000 drams. That is not a small amount of money for many people, especially for those living in the regions.
Azerbaijan? No, I wouldn't want that. Importing goods from Azerbaijan. Never.
After all, we all make mistakes. Armenian mistakes are no less significant. And it seems to me there is quite a lot of blood in or on our hands as well.
In my opinion, the Americans proposed this, the Trump route. It suits us, and our government has agreed because it really brings us a lot of benefit.
I am much more in favor, of course, of Armenia having closer ties with the West.
A warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Now, Andy Mioch is here with the very latest business news stories. Andy, what have you got for us tonight?
Well, Guy, the new global tariff the U.S. president imposed after a court struck down most of his old ones has taken effect. Another major company has sued the U.S. government for tariff refunds. We'll also take a look at oil prices, among other news, so let's get into it. U.S. President Donald Trump's new tariffs have come into effect at a lower than expected rate of 10%. Despite an announcement he'll raise the rate to 15%, Trump did not officially do so by the time the levy kicked in.
US President Donald Trump's reworked global tariffs began Tuesday at a rate of 10%, even though he said over the weekend that they would start at 15%. On Friday, after the Supreme Court struck down most of Trump's tariff agenda, he announced that he would quickly implement a 10% flat tariff for all trading partners using a different trade law.
Wow.
One day later, Trump posted on Truth Social that, effective immediately, he would be raising the 10% worldwide tariff to 15%. Under the trade law the administration is now turning to, called Section 122, tariffs of up to 15% can be quickly applied, but only for up to 150 days. Hours before the sweeping tariff took effect at 12:01 a.m., US Customs and Border Protection sent a memo informing importers that the rate would be 10% at first and that it would apply to every country for a period of 150 days, unless specifically exempt. A White House official confirmed to NBC that the administration is working on raising the tariff to 15% in a separate order that Trump will need to sign.
Global logistics company FedEx has sued the Trump administration, seeking a full refund of all tariffs it paid the government under the overturned International Emergency Economic Powers Act. According to estimates, some $175 billion in U.S. tariff collections are now subject to potential refunds.
FedEx on Monday filed a lawsuit in the U.S. Court of International Trade seeking a refund for President Donald Trump's emergency tariffs. In the suit, the global transportation company named U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Agency Commissioner Rodney Scott, and the United States of America as defendants. It says it seeks a full refund from the defendants of International Emergency Economic Powers Act duties paid to the United States. FedEx and its logistics arm served as importer of record on goods subject to the emergency tariffs. The Memphis-based company did not provide the dollar value of the refund it is seeking, and none of the parties immediately replied to a request for comment. But the move is one of the highest profile attempts to recover funds since the US Supreme Court last week deemed the levies illegal. More than $175 billion in US tariff collections are subject to potential refunds, according to Penn Wharton budget model economists. Meanwhile, Trump on Monday warned countries against backing away from recently negotiated trade deals with the US. He wrote on social media that any country that wants to, quote, play games with the Supreme Court decision will be met with a much higher tariff than that which they recently agreed to. Trump said he also may impose license fees on trading partners.
Oil prices have reached 7-month highs as traders reacted to heightened tensions between the United States and Iran ahead of a new round of nuclear talks this week in Geneva.
Oil prices hovered near 7-month highs on Tuesday, with traders assessing risks to supply from any military escalation as another round of US-Iran nuclear talks loomed. Brent crude futures were unchanged at $71.49 a barrel at 10:37 Greenwich Mean Time, while US crude futures climbed 11 cents, or 0.2%, to $66.42 a barrel. Brent is trading at its highest since late July, while WTI is at its firmest since early August. Washington and Tehran are set to hold a third round of nuclear talks in Geneva this Thursday.
Over to the pharma industry, Novo Nordisk said it's lowering the US list price for its blockbuster weight loss and diabetes drugs by as much as half starting next year. The move could help lower out-of-pocket costs for certain patients whose insurance plans can leave them exposed.
Danish drug maker Novo Nordisk says it plans to slash US list prices of its blockbuster diabetes and weight loss drugs, Ozempic and Wegovy, by up to 50% starting next year. Novo Nordisk will cut the list prices for the first time, especially to reduce high out-of-pocket costs for patients enrolled in high-deductible health plans or pay co-insurance that is a percentage of list price. Both Ozempic and Wegovy will list for $675 a month, effective January 1st, which is half the current price for Wegovy and a 34% cut for diabetes treatment Ozempic. The price cuts also will apply to pill versions of both injections, including one sold as Rybelsus. The effective date of Novo Nordisk's price cuts will coincide with the implementation of new, lower prices for the same drugs under federal Medicare health plans for older adults.
On to entertainment. According to reports, Paramount Skydance has submitted a higher offer for Warner Bros. Discovery, ratcheting up efforts to derail the HBO Max owner's deal with Netflix. The new unspecified bid improves on the $30 a share all-cash proposal that Paramount took directly to Warner Brothers shareholders back in December.
Paramount has submitted a higher offer for Warner Brothers Discovery in an attempt to derail a deal with Netflix. A source familiar with the matter told Reuters on Monday. The bidding war for one of Hollywood's most coveted underscores a desire for dominance in the streaming-led market, with Warner Brothers being home to HBO Max and franchises including Harry Potter and Game of Thrones. The source said Paramount's new bid, which improves its initial offer of $104.8 billion, seeks to address Warner Brothers' concerns about the certainty of its financing. Netflix, which offered to buy it for $27.75 per share, or $82.7 billion, is allowed to match the latest bid from Paramount. A Variety report said that the iconic studio was likely to take the Paramount offer under review, while still recommending the Netflix pact to its shareholders. Netflix has ample cash and could bump up its offer, while Paramount's rival bid is backed by Oracle billionaire Larry Ellison. Warner Brothers shareholders were set to decide the fate of Netflix's offer on March 20th. A green light from investors would move the deal forward, but it'd still face intense scrutiny from US and European competition authorities. These bodies must assess whether combining Netflix's global streaming power with Warner Brothers' century-old studio assets would reduce competition or limit consumer choice.
And finally, in the auto industry, Ford is recalling more than 400,000 vehicles in the United States. The company cited an issue that could lead to a loss of steering control.
Ford is recalling 412,774 Explorer SUVs in the US, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said on Tuesday. Ford cited an issue with rear suspension toe links, which may fracture and lead to a loss of steering control, as a reason for the recall. The NHTSA suggested that the dealers replace the toe links free of charge as a remedy for the affected vehicles. Separately, Ford will also recall an additional 40,655 vehicles in the US over battery failures and defects with brake pedals, which increase the risk of a crash.
And that is all in the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll be talking about Lord Peter Mandelson's release on bail and what it could mean for politics in the UK. Stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back to Primetime. Now, Lord Mandelson has been released from police custody after his arrest in London on suspicion of misconduct in public office, as investigators continue examining his reported links to Jeffrey Epstein. A News' correspondent in Manchester brings us more.
Former British ambassador to the US, Lord Mandelson, has been released from police custody hours after his arrest in London on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He was detained on Monday at an address in Camden, North London, and taken to a police station for questioning. Police said the arrest followed search warrants at properties in Camden and Wiltshire. Mandelson was released on bail pending further investigation and was seen returning home at around 2 a.m. local time. The former ambassador was dismissed from his post in September after details of his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein emerged. Earlier this month, police launched a criminal investigation after the government passed on communications between Mandelson and Epstein to authorities. The government says it expects to publish the first documents related to his appointment in early March. Responding to the arrest, the family of Virginia Jeffrey welcomed the move, saying authorities were treating the Epstein files with the urgency they deserve and criticized what they called inaction in the United States. Last week, former Prince Andrew was also arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Over separate allegations, he shared confidential government documents with Epstein. He has denied any wrongdoing. Zena Ferrisada, News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
OK, let's bring in UK political analyst Alexander Claxon now, as Peter Mandelson is released on bail and questions begin to surface about the wider political impact. Alexander, very good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us on the show. Keir Starmer fought to hire this man, didn't he, against official advice. Yeah. How is it that he's avoiding serious calls to resign?
Well, that's the crux of the matter. Keir Starmer managed to survive what you can call as the first wave of the news that came about Peter Mandelson a few weeks ago, when it just became known to what extent he still continued his engagement and communication with the deceased sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and it was very much hanging in the balance whether Keir Starmer would survive. Now, for the moment, it looks like he has managed to hang on, but it does seem to me that the story is not over, not one bit, as this investigation into Peter Mandelson's ties with Jeffrey Epstein and how much Keir Starmer knew continues. There will be new questions asked about Keir Starmer's judgment as to why he decided to appoint Peter Mandelson as the UK's ambassador to the United States, how much Keir Starmer knew about Mandelson's ties and communication with Jeffrey Epstein, and whether this was just a lack of judgment, whether this was a failure in vetting, or was it just Keir Starmer's, let's say, not really caring that much about the fact that Peter Mandelson had these disturbing ties with Jeffrey Epstein. Either way, it doesn't look good for Keir Starmer, so I think his position still remains very much in the balance.
It's very interesting, this. As a British citizen myself, I know that the public has been aware of Peter Mandelson for decades, but there was always this sort of summarised view among politicians around Westminster, which was, yes, we don't like the fact that he has made friends and ingratiated himself with some of the worst people in the world, frankly, but he's worth the risk sometimes because of these tremendous skills that he possesses. But I think a lot of people now are wondering, what are these tremendous skills? Is that a bit of a tall story too? What is the upside that you get and that these politicians thought they got by employing this man?
Yeah, well, I think Peter Mandelson right now carries more, let's say, symbolic weight. As you probably know, he was the architect of the New Labour movement, which essentially catapulted, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown into power a few decades ago. And so back then, of course, he did carry a lot of political weight, and he was the man that essentially established this New Labour movement, which was in charge for quite some number of years. But I think as time went on, of course, his his political weight diminished, but he did still carry that symbolic weight, including in the Labour Party. He was still one of the top guys that ensured that Labour managed to get into power, rebranded the party from the old Labour into New Labour. So he was seen as someone who was quite capable of delivering success for the Labour Party. But of course now, as these allegations come out, of course we see a completely different side to him, and of course now he has become a complete liability to the Labour Party, and the public will be asking the question: well, is there some kind of a two-tier system within the, let's say, the Labour Party or within government as a whole, where someone of Peter Mandelson's stature and seniority could get away in the past for so long, despite perhaps these ties to Jeffrey Epstein's known among certain circles. So I think the public, of course, will be very disappointed, to say the least, as to how things turned out.
And I think, Alexander, one of the things, you're right, I think they are disappointed. And I think one of the things they're really struggling to reconcile is this reputation that Keir Starmer has always had, even long before politics, as being absolutely forensic in the detailed research that he does on people. I mean, he was famous for it as a lawyer. And then the glaringness, if that's a word, of the situation. You look at Peter Mandelson, a basic salary for a British MP is about £5,000 a month. The strict controls on expenses, strict controls on commercial relationships. Peter Mandelson's wealth is estimated to be worth between 10 and 12 million pounds. The house that we're all seeing on TV with the Range Rover outside, that alone is apparently worth 7 million pounds. I mean, why on earth has it taken so long for scrutiny to catch up with this man?
Yeah, well, that's right, and that's what the public will be asking. And I don't want to make comparisons to the United States, but the famous Donald Trump's phrase, "drain the swamp." Obviously, he ran on that campaign. And of course, we haven't heard such a phrase here in the UK, but you can imagine certain people perhaps not using that phrase, but having similar thoughts, really. Is there some kind of a swamp in Westminster, a political swamp as such, that essentially an elite band of people who protect each other, who support each other, and as I said, have some kind of a two-tier system where the general public are very much bound by the law, as they should be, but there is that certain class of people in Westminster that seems to be, let's say, above the law, or at least were above the law for some time. Of course, now Peter Mandelson is under investigation, so things might change. But as you rightly point out, his commercial deals have been going on for ages. He's had his own consultancy firm whilst being a lord, so that also raises questions of how can one be both in business while also serving in government in the House of Lords. So there are a lot of questions to be asked, and of course the main one is, why was he appointed as the ambassador, and whether this indeed was a major mistake by Keir Starmer. And if it was, then of course it's not just Peter Mandelson that should see this downfall. Of course, there should be other people as well, perhaps including Keir Starmer himself.
We've spoken about the public and public opinion about this. What about those inside that Westminster bubble? What is the mood now in relation to this topic? I mean, is it widespread revulsion, a sense of, my goodness, we better get our act together and make sure this doesn't happen again? Or is there a sort of a more pragmatic perspective?
Well, I think that depends which political party we're talking about. Of course, within Labour, it's going to be about damage control. It's going to be about, well, can we survive this? As I said, Keir Starmer managed to survive the first wave. He had these meetings with MPs, and they applauded him. Might have that been too soon? If let's say this investigation, and apparently there are going to be some documents released in early March about Peter Mandelson and his appointment as the ambassador. If these documents show, let's say, that some senior Labour government officials, including perhaps Keir Starmer, more knew that they so far have let us know, or if there are some inconsistencies between what was said and what these documents show, then of course even I think within the Labour Party itself, there are going to be calls for Keir Starmer to resign, because simply he's going to be a liability for the party. I think in terms of the Conservative Party, who are currently in opposition, well, they will be, let's say, enjoying this situation. Not, of course, from the point of view of the damage that Peter Mandelson has done to the reputation to the UK as a whole, but of course they will be looking at a possible early election if the Labour Party manages to completely unravel. They'll be calling for Keir Starmer to resign, I think, with the view of perhaps holding elections sooner than perhaps Labour would have wanted, and then looking to perhaps take charge of the government. But I think it'll be too early for the Conservatives to make a return anyway. So I think there are a lot of questions still to be asked.
And finally, Alexander, whichever party you're in, whichever political persuasion you have, do you think an incident like this will really change anything in the long term? Or will governments always be attracted to the sort of the irresistible things that characters like Mandelson can supposedly offer them?
Well, I think the more we find out about Jeffrey Epstein as a whole, and these documents that have been released, we seem to find out more and more that there just seems to be this let's say elite class which seems to be kind of above everyone else, regardless which country they're from, which political party they're in. It really doesn't seem to matter, and it does raise the question: we among the public we squabble about different political issues. We fight for a political party, and it creates this sort of impression that politics matter. And then you look at these situations like Peter Mandelson, and you kind of realize that above all of that, there just seems to be a completely different world where it doesn't really matter which political party you come from or what affiliations you have. As long as you have influence and power, you'll be important to someone else who might be from a completely different political background. And I think as more and more people realize this, there will be more and more, let's say, disaffection with the political class as a whole, which will give rise to new parties. Let's say, for instance, like Reform in the UK, and other, for now, fringe parties across Europe, which are gaining more and more footholds. I think all of this situation will have major repercussions across the world, where you'll see these mainstream parties losing trust among the public.
Alexander, great to speak to you. Thanks very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
Okay, joining me now as attention shifts beyond the immediate legal process to public reaction, media framing, and whether this sparks a wider debate about standards in public life is UK political analyst Peter Barnes. Peter, great to have you back on PrimeTime. Good to see you there. Voters are angry, understandably. How angry are they, do you think? To some degree, is this still just a Westminster conversation with the public just sort of wringing their hands saying, oh, you're all as bad as each other?
Well, it's quite an interesting question, really, because YouGov, one of the big polling companies here in the UK, did quite a substantive poll, actually, and it found that 35% of Britons actually understood Epstein files, Peter Mandelson, and Labour to be a single story at a whopping 35%. Wow. That is actually significantly notable for most polling on these kind of issues, because the fact is, if it stays as a kind of political gossip, it won't get much traction. We have a lot of issues here in the United Kingdom. There's a lot of things going wrong, and the Prime Minister is dogged with scandal after scandal, resignation after resignation. So, this is like one of many things on his roster. But if this moves into what is more dangerous for the Prime Minister, a kind of a question of competence and a standards in life question, I mean, this is resignation territory just on the Prime Minister alone, let alone a number of the cabinet who would have been involved in the appointment of Lord Mandelson to the Ambassador of the United States. So, yeah, this is really at the moment, because it's a little bit of the legal process here in the UK is very slow. So the tone fills the gap. So we're at that stage at the moment. But if it's at 35% now, this is not good news for the Labour Party.
It's not. And I think a lot of people outside of the UK will be astonished that Starmer hasn't been forced to resign. I mean, he fought to appoint this guy against the advice. He's a famously forensically detailed lawyer. who somehow missed the obvious signs that everybody else could see. Is there a problem? I remember when I worked in London, Peter, there was a sense in which the Tories, once they realise you're a lame candidate, will fire you very quickly. They're quite ruthless. Whereas the Labour Party, it takes a lot longer. Is there something structurally that's just preventing them from getting rid of Starmer?
Yes, that's a really good point. I do find it interesting that you think he's quite a forensic lawyer. This has come under quite a lot of scrutiny here in the UK recently because of these incidents, because this isn't just a one-off when it comes to Keir Starmer's kind of question of judgment in recent weeks. I think it was
his boss. Sorry to cut in. I think it was a quote from his boss, from his previous boss, or the head of his show. Right. He said that he was terrible in front. He was terrible in front of jury members. He couldn't connect with jury members at all emotionally, but he was very good when it came to doing research behind the scenes. But no, I take your point. There's evidence to conflict with that more recently.
Oh, definitely. There's a recent appointment of the Keir Starmer to the House of Lords by a guy called Matthew Doyle. His whole direction of communications has had a questionable past as well, and that has been brought up into question. But to bring it back to the structure of the Labour Party, it's actually very difficult to get rid of a leader of the Labour Party. It's because it's quite factional, and each wing of the Labour Party has a certain amount of votes and a certain amount of pressure that it can actually trigger any kind of movement when it comes to leadership potential and all that kind of thing. It's very complex, and it's done deliberately because of how factional the Labour Party is. You're correct on the Tory Party and the Conservatives. They are literally they will stab you in the front and not stab you in the back kind of people. So yeah, once you're a lame duck, you are pretty much defenestrated out of the closest window they can find. Look at Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Theresa May. They've got quite the track record in the last few years, but yeah, it is interesting how Keir Starmer has been able to hang on for quite some time. But we often remark here, there's a lot of things that should have brought Keir Starmer. We're all convinced it's going to be something terribly mundane that actually does bring him down in the end, because the big stuff doesn't seem to stick.
The Al Capone scenario. Yeah, very, very interesting indeed. Peter, you obviously work in the media. Some of our viewers will be familiar with your shows, your analyses. How is the media in the UK dealing with this right now? And where do you think it might go next?
So this is yet again one of those kind of, it could go either way, because like I said, tone is filling the gap at the moment. And if it kind of really sticks as this kind of political gossip, this kind of what we call over the garden fence conversation, it's really unlikely to actually make that significant an impact, because at the same time, we've got the former Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. He's also been recently arrested and questioned, and he's not been charged, and it's important to mention neither has Peter Mandelson. But we are in real interesting times over here in the UK, because the curtain has been pulled back, as we like to say, on the establishment. It's starting to show its cracks and its creaks, and all the dirty secrets are coming out on the front pages. Now, it will be interesting when we have the data dump of these documents in relation to the appointment of Lord Mandelson, and who knew what. And that moment, I think, will change the conversation quite a bit, because current serving members of the government and the kind of political establishment that will have had quite a lot to say in the appointment of Peter Mandelson, because the appointment to Washington is the top job, really. It's what everybody wants to get. So, yeah, it will be how that goes down will define how the future of this story kind of plays out. But realistically, the media has a big role to play in this by really putting out the actual facts to the public and making sure that we don't kind of wander off into gossip, which is unfortunately what far too many people seem to be doing.
Indeed. And on this issue of standards in public life, I just thought it'd be interesting to play devil's advocate on this one, because do you think we've reached a point where what the public demands in terms of standards of behaviour just isn't possible? I'm thinking of the fact that, the Great Britain exists in a very big, scary world where lots of things happen and business is done often in a way that we wouldn't like it to be done, but nevertheless it is done that way. Is it essential, just to in the business of government, to have access to these people who can speak to these sort of shady characters behind the scenes? Or do we take an alternative view where we really do strive for a kind of whiter than white approach to government?
That's an interesting thought experiment, because here in the UK, I like to say that we put people on pedestals deliberately to push them off. So in other words, we like to elevate people and then we like to take them down at the same time. And we have a really problematic approach when it comes to standards in public life, because we like to think that we're all a lot better people than we are. And I think that's a big problem. But I do think when you've been around the political scene as long as I have, you know how the sausage is made, you know how things actually get done. And I think if people aren't, immune to that, I think people are aware that politics is a dirty business. I mean, politics itself is used as a dirty word, but I have to admit, I think standards have dropped significantly because we've turned into a very kind politics is very dichotomous. In other words, you're this or you're that. You're this side or you're that side. And you will automatically defend your own side, even if they've done wrongdoing. And I think this is the real problem, is because we're so adversarial at the moment, we aren't holding our own side accountable for what they actually do or say, or any kind of failures that they have. So things are ratcheting up in terms of the seriousness of what people are getting away with in terms of, any legal or even kind of moral issues. It's because we want to beat the other side. And I think until we kind of take our, put our guns down, I don't think anything's really going to change in terms of actually getting better for the general public and for the country as a whole.
And Peter, what about the timing looking ahead now? Do you think that is Starmer kind of hoping that whatever happens with Mandelson takes quite a long time? I mean, it's unlikely to take so long that it gets him to the next election. Give us a sense of the timing and the next steps that you think are likely to happen.
Well, it's interesting because in 2 days' time, we have a by-election here. We had an MP step down, and this has been a hotly contested a local election. It's going to be... the Labour Party seem to be on track to lose it, or they could win it, or it is literally anybody's game at the moment. So this is what we're all kind of keeping our eye on, because this is going to be a great indicator as to how well the government is doing. But as I said, we've got a lot of problems in the UK, and to think that the result will be a kind of verdict on the Mandelson issue, I think a lot of people might jump on, but I think that's wrong. But I think the main movement will be when we get the documents released, which apparently is going to be around about the 1st, 2nd of March. So that's going to be a big crunch time for the government. I know for a fact that they've kind of repositioned Downing Street to be in a kind of defense mode, as they say, and in terms of its kind of PR strategy, the people that it's brought in and people that have stepped aside, the people, and now it's much more of a kind of crisis communication structure than it is a kind of simple kind of press office and political machine like Number 10 normally is. I've been involved in these things before, and the attention to detail has to be high, because you've still got police investigations, you could have potential other investigations going on as well. So this is going to be a real crunch time for the capability of the Prime Minister to actually be the Prime Minister in a political crisis, because this is one he can't get out of, because it's not a politics problem, it's a process problem now. And that is a big difference in terms of how you handle it and what you can actually do to get out of it.
Yeah, it's a very good point indeed. And finally, in terms of what happens next, do you think that it's likely that this will Mandelson gets convicted, let's say, he gets sent to prison, all politicians will look sternly into the camera and shake their head with disapproval and clench their fist and say how, this can never happen again. But do you think it will actually really change much structurally?
I don't think so, but I'm very much of a pessimist and a cynic. So I've been somewhat jaded by the Westminster bubble, but I will say I hope that it will. I do think there will be some movement on change. I think we will see a lot more kind of beefing up of the regulations about what people can do outside of public life. Yes. I think that is a big step that we have to take, because there's no way that Lord Mandelson should have that much wealth, considering the fact that his average salary is a documented fact. I don't understand how that's not been investigated further. I think these are the calls that we'll start to see from the public via the ballot box, because obviously you've got the Reform UK party on the rise, and they promised to change politics, and we've got lots of other issues as well that I think just raising the standards, raising the bar, and raising the level of expectations, I think, on politicians will make a huge amount of difference. But unfortunately, I have a feeling that this will be yet another, they're all in it for themselves kind of story, and nothing will really change, despite the fact it's the prime opportunity for that very change.
Peter, great to speak to you as always. We'll see you again soon, I'm sure. Thank you. OK, after the break, we'll take a look at Sudan's deepening conflict as calls for a humanitarian truce clash with continued military escalation. Do stay with us.
The
We have a dependency on the Russian economy, as we do with any economy, because we currently import a large volume of goods.
Armenia has always been Russia's closest and best friend in every matter. But today, Russia has abandoned and dumped Armenia.
During the 2020 war, we were in strategic relations with Russia. Not only did they not help, but they didn't help even when requested.
They brought in gasoline from Azerbaijan, and the price dropped by 50 drams. When you fill a 20-liter tank, that is a saving of 1,000 drams. That is not a small amount of money for many people, especially for those living in the regions.
Azerbaijan? No, I wouldn't want that. Importing goods from Azerbaijan. Never.
After all, we all make mistakes. Armenian mistakes are no less significant. And it seems to me there is quite a lot of blood in or on our hands as well.
In my opinion, the Americans proposed this, the Trump route. It suits us, and our government has agreed because it really brings us a lot of benefit.
I am much more in favor, of course, of Armenia having closer ties with the West.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Sudan's war is deepening, with Washington urging an urgent truce to allow humanitarian access, while General al-Burhan rejects any ceasefire and vows to press on militarily as millions face displacement, hunger and growing regional instability. A News's Naba Mohideen reports now from Port Sudan.
Thanks, Guy. Actually, Washington is calling for a truce to allow humanitarian aid and protect civilians trapped in conflict zones in Sudan and in Sudan generally, as fighting is, of course, devastating an already dire situation and deepening the insecurity in the country. U.S. officials say the fighting in Sudan between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces not only impacting civilians, Guy, but also impacting wider regions and neighboring countries, including Chad, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Egypt, Libya, and South Sudan, and of course, Central African Republic. So U.S. officials are calling for an urgent truce, but Sudan's Burhan, the army chief, the General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, is rejecting any negotiations with the RSF and any ceasefire under the current conditions, saying that there is no options but defeating the RSF due to what he described. And he said military operations will continue in various states in Sudan until RSF will be defeated. Of course, this situation means a lot of suffering. It will result in a lot of suffering for civilians trapped in war zones and civilians who aid cannot access them, including people in South Kordofan and people in Western Kordofan, and of course in Darfur, which is now fully controlled by the RSF. The situation in Sudan and the humanitarian crisis is deepening, and aid agencies say that people are reliant on humanitarian aid, and the humanitarian crisis is only worsening. More than 30 million people are in need of urgent food assistance in the country, and the escalation of fighting in various states is only worsening the situation. All of the U.S. And other regional and international blocs initiatives to end the fighting have so far failed. The two warring parties are conditioning some conditions before enrolling or involving in any negotiation talks, but U.S. officials are confirming that the only way to solve the situation, to end the fighting in Sudan, is negotiation tables. But in the current situation, we are only seeing the escalation of the fighting, which means for civilians, the deadlock and the political deadlock for civilians means the situation will, of course, complicate further before it will ease. More than 13 million people have been displaced and forced from their homes since the fighting began in April 2023, with more than 4 million people have, of course, seek refuge in neighboring countries. So all of the international pressure right now is needed to end the war in Sudan, and first of all, to secure a sustainable humanitarian ceasefire. Thanks, Guy. Back to you.
Okay, let's bring in Dr. Hervé Ale Mwanyo now, specialist in international relations and conflict resolution. He's joining us from Colchester, England, as Washington calls for a truce in Sudan while General Burhan rejects a ceasefire. Dr. Mwanyo, thank you very much for joining us on PrimeTime. It's good to see you. What do you think this rejection tells us then about the current balance of power inside Sudan?
First of all, thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be here and to share my expertise or knowledge of the matter. The issue here is threefold. There is a military calculation, advantage or disadvantage from one side or another. You also have the struggle over the sovereignty or legitimacy of Mr. Burhan. And the third part of that is the fragmented internal as well as external political alignments. So you've got a personality, a figure that's looking at this conflict as a personal undertaking, bear in mind that it comes from a linear part of a political system that was in power for many years with the previous government that they deposed in the end. But that's the background, that's where it comes from. So going forward, although he has a different mindset to his previous leaders, nevertheless, he still has that understanding that power is something that is not negotiable unless he's pushed to his back is up against the wall.
Yeah, very interesting indeed that to get the context there. And what about the United States in all of this? I mean, some people just assume that the United States says something, they say jump, and every other country says how high. It's much more nuanced than that, though, isn't it? The US has been pushing, hasn't it, for a truce. How significant is that, do you think?
Absolutely. Up until recently, in the past 10 years or so, we've noticed that there is a lot of pushback, especially when it comes to the Western influence or Western-led initiatives. This is only reflecting the broader mood in the third world or the global south as it's known now. And the fact that the United States is allied to the UAE, which is opposed or in complicated relationship, if we can call it, with the Sudan regime, for General Burhan, he's looking at it as though the United States is basically working on behalf of the UAE to destabilize the country. So in an ordinary manner, the United States, being part of the West, is already being seen as a destabilizing figure rather than a united figure. But couple that with the fact that the UAE, which is actively in disaccord with Sudan at the moment, they seeing it as United States working with UAE to give more legitimacy or power to the opposition rather than to actually support the government with Mr. Burhan.
So if the US and the UAE are examples of actors that will likely be rejected in terms of trying to influence the trajectory of a truce, What potential alternatives might there be, other external countries that would be more acceptable?
For General Burhan, you've got these dynamics where some quasi-alliances are being formed. The stability they see coming from the countries such as Egypt, such as Saudi Arabia, where they recognize that there is some sort of protection that they can get from there, providing that those countries are also within the talk. But as long as the United States is unilaterally setting the stage, and so long as they are aligned with the UAE, it makes it very difficult for the Burhan regime to come to the table and actually speak, because UAE is suspected of financing and arming the rebels, the opposition part. So for General Burhan, this is a little difficult to accept in good faith that the United States is actually being truthful.
Yes, I can see that. And then what about regional stability? Do you think there's a real risk, a real danger that continued fighting can start to cause ripple effects that go beyond into the wider region?
Absolutely. Look at the map where the country, where Sudan is. You've got Chad, South Sudan, all the neighboring countries unstable as they are already. So any escalation would be and is going to be one of those things that could have a massive ripple effect on the neighboring countries as well as in the world globally. As you know so well, that asylum seekers across the world, they don't come from one country to another. They go from one country to another, to another, to another. Everything that's happening in Sudan at the moment would have beyond the repercussion beyond the continent of Africa. They would go into Western world. They would go so far as America and wherever they can find peace, if there is anywhere they go.
Okay, let's try and end, if we can, on a as hopeful a note as possible. Do you think there is any potential for a ceasefire? And if so, what would the conditions have to look like?
The way I'm seeing it at the moment, so long as the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt are not talking with each other, it's really difficult for other countries to come in, because bear in mind as well, there is a Russian influence in the situation. And globally, it's now been observed, especially in third world country, where Russia and United States are literally pulling punches against each other, as well as the European Union. If there is something that I can look up or advise that could work, it would be the negotiation must be inclusive, must be open, and must welcome both sides, because apparently General Burhan has been calling for a Sudanese negotiation rather than external negotiation to come through. So long as there are mechanisms to bring the two parties together in a fair and open communication, there could be something there. But the way I see it, and based on the report from your reporter, the two parties, the two sides are so entrenched in their own belief of legitimacy that they are not really at the moment willing to give an inch, because each side believes they have the upper hand and they can actually control the country as they are. So at the moment, it's a zero-sum game between the two sides. So long as we can provide them with another solution, they would be locked into looking at that zero-sum game as a solution.
A zero-sum game. Dr. Mwanya, we thank you very much indeed for analysis. We appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the fallout in Mexico after a deadly military raid triggers nationwide cartel retaliation and forces authorities to restore order. Do stay with us.
We have a dependency on the Russian economy, as we do with any economy, because we currently import a large volume of goods.
Armenia has always been Russia's closest and best friend in every matter. But today, Russia has abandoned and dumped Armenia.
During the 2020 war, we were in strategic relations with Russia. Not only did they not help, but they didn't help even when requested.
They brought in gasoline from Azerbaijan, and the price dropped by 50 drams. When you fill a 20-liter tank, that is a saving of 1,000 drams. That is not a small amount of money for many people, especially for those living in the regions.
Azerbaijan? No, I wouldn't want that. Importing goods from Azerbaijan. Never.
After all, we all make mistakes. Armenian mistakes are no less significant. And it seems to me there is quite a lot of blood in or on our hands as well.
In my opinion, the Americans proposed this, the Trump route. It suits us, and our government has agreed because it really brings us a lot of benefit.
I am much more in favor, of course, of Armenia having closer ties with the West.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
We have a dependency on the Russian economy, as we do with any economy, because we currently import a large volume of goods.
Armenia has always been Russia's closest and best friend in every matter. But today, Russia has abandoned and dumped Armenia.
During the 2020 war, we were in strategic relations with Russia. Not only did they not help, but they didn't help even when requested.
They brought in gasoline from Azerbaijan, and the price dropped by 50 drams. When you fill a 20-liter tank, that is a saving of 1,000 drams. That is not a small amount of money for many people, especially for those living in the regions.
Azerbaijan? No, I wouldn't want that. Importing goods from Azerbaijan. Never.
After all, we all make mistakes. Armenian mistakes are no less significant. And it seems to me there is quite a lot of blood in or on our hands as well.
In my opinion, the Americans proposed this, the Trump route. It suits us, and our government has agreed because it really brings us a lot of benefit.
I am much more in favor, of course, of Armenia having closer ties with the West.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
A warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. At least 62 people are dead in Mexico after a pre-dawn military raid targeting one of the country's most wanted cartel figures sparked coordinated violence across multiple states. Troops are now on the ground, flights have been disrupted, and authorities are racing to reassert control.
Security remains tight across several states in Mexico after a pre-dawn military operation against cartel leader Nemesio Oseguera, better known as El Mencho, left at least 62 people dead and sparked coordinated violence nationwide. Among those killed were 25 members of the National Guard and 34 suspected gang members. Dozens more were injured as cartel loyalists set up 85 roadblocks in more than a dozen states, torching vehicles and blocking highways. The government has deployed 2,000 additional troops to Jalisco, the stronghold of the Jalisco New Generation cartel. The operation comes amid renewed pressure from US President Donald Trump on Mexico to intensify its crackdown on drug trafficking ahead of a review of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement Trade Pact.
All operations are carried out by federal forces. There is no U.S. participation in the operation. What there is, as we have said here several times, is a great deal of information sharing. The understanding with the United States is based primarily on the exchange of intelligence information.
Officials say a tip linked to El Mencho's romantic relationships led security forces to his hideout in the mountain town of Tapalpa. He was wounded in a firefight and died while being airlifted to Mexico City. In Guadalajara, streets remain unusually quiet, with businesses shut and public transport running below normal levels.
Yes, I'm afraid, but I also need to work. And so we're working here, but keeping an eye on the situation, and depending on it, we'll see if we take shelter or continue working.
Tourism has also been affected, with flights to Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara suspended over the weekend.
It's not possible to get out right now because, first, we're not allowed to leave the resort under any circumstance, so we're locked down in the resort. And even if we went out on the streets, the cartel would stop us and force us to get out of the car and light the car on fire. So the whole city is under lockdown. No one is going out because everyone is scared of getting stopped by the cartel.
Oseguera was considered Mexico's most wanted drug trafficker and headed one of the country's most powerful and heavily armed criminal organizations with global operations. President Claudia Sheinbaum said on Monday morning that roadblocks had been cleared and the situation was expected to normalize, with flights due to resume on Monday or Tuesday.
Okay, let's bring in now Latin America specialist David Rosenthal as Mexico confronts the fallout from the operation that left El Mencho dead and violence spreading across several states. David, very good to see you. Thank you for joining us on PrimeTime. Is this a decisive blow to the cartel then? I mean, they sound incredibly powerful. Do you think there's a chance this could just be a new dangerous phase of their operations?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So I think that the death of the El Mencho is meaning that the drug dealers organization, the narco terrorist organizations in Mexico especially, but also in Latin America and in other parts of the world, means a new era that America, the United States, are very important here because Trump, the government of Trump, Trump's government, is working hard to take these narco dealers, like the heads of the crime organizations. So maybe will become like new groups of drugs dealers of crime that can be very bad in Mexico, especially now. But I think it's good that the era of the narco is taking a new way, no? Like, let's see what will happen, but I think it's interesting in the war against the narcos.
Yeah, it's certainly very interesting. I mean, the retaliation was very fast, highly organized. I think a lot of people that perhaps don't live in Mexico are not familiar with this problem sort of up close and personal, would be asking the question, how is it almost impossible to get rid of a problem like this? You know, how deep do the cartels go? Has the government got any realistic chance of actually getting rid of these cartels?
I think it's not really realistic because they even have more power than the government. Claudia Sheinbaum now, but before AMLO. And you can say that Mexican leaders even in the biggest economic companies in the industry, they are related with the mafia. Also, of course, the politicians and the police, like we saw in the recordings that El Mencho had with police leader, like he is more powerful and more important than the police even.
Wow, I mean, that's quite shocking. I mean, how considerable is this then? I mean, I think we can all imagine, you know, perhaps one or two corrupt politicians or, you know, a smattering of officials that are under the influence of the cartels. But is it much more considerable than that?
Yeah, I think is the situation of Mexico now is like the situation that had Colombia in the 80s and 90s, and also very similar to the south of Italy, like in the 70s, 60s, of course, in America, in Canada, there are a lot of mafia that they are in a good part Italians or Latin Americans, but I think the situation now is very complicated in the meaning that the mafia and all the money laundering, the dollars laundering, has a big representation in the markets, in the industry, in the political campaigns. So it's a big war against the mafia that I think starts in the 70s, but today just transformed to this now.
Now, the president was very clear that the US has had no role beyond intelligence sharing. Was that statement about reassuring people in Mexico, is that an important thing to state in terms of domestic popularity?
Yeah, I think Claudia Sheinbaum, the president, she doesn't want that the Mexicans and the politicians also in South America, Latin America, thinks that she is very related with Trump government because she's a president from left, she's leftist. So I think also for topics about sovereignty, she prefers that looks like all the operation was executed by the Mexican police and the Mexican intelligence and Mexican forces, and not with the help or even with the completely operation from Trump's government, CIA, and the American police, etc.
Yeah, I mean, she's really facing battles on multiple fronts, isn't she? Because, of course, not only is she fighting the cartels, but she's under pressure from Washington too. We know there's the trade review coming up. How intertwined are these pressures at the moment? You've got security and economics almost sort of coming together to pressurize this president.
Yeah, she has also the inheritance of AMLO, so she has very big problems. Mexico start to have the big problems with the mafia, like the big contamination of the mafia from the 2000s, I think. So Mexico now is not so easy to administrate a country like this. That, like I told before, the mafia even has more power than the traditional politicians, than the industry leaders. So is really a challenge to Sheinbaum, and she's under pressure, of course, also because the people that elect her expects that she make a good administration, and of course she deals the mafia topic with strength, but it's not so easy.
And how? I mean, we've touched on this already, but with those networks, with these cartel networks so entrenched, are you hopeful at all that the country will be able to progress economically over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I think that Mexico is a rich country. It's like a country that will become even richer, you know, like is very close to America, is just in the limit with America, is one of his frontiers. So I think the economy of Mexico can be good, can increase, is not really a problem. But the problem now is the security and also the social difference between like the elite and the, you know, the popular class. So I think it's a country with challenges like all the countries in South America. But in the economy field, I think that Mexico has a great potential.
David, we appreciate your analysis very much indeed. Thank you for joining us on PrimeTime.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents all around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Do stay with us.
We have a dependency on the Russian economy, as we do with any economy, because we currently import a large volume of goods.
Armenia has always been Russia's closest and best friend in every matter. But today, Russia has abandoned and dumped Armenia. During the 2020 war, we were in strategic relations with Russia. Not only did they not help, but they didn't help even when requested.
They brought in gasoline from Azerbaijan, and the price dropped by 50 drams. When you fill a 20-liter tank, that is a saving of 1,000 drams. That is not a small amount of money for many people, especially for those living in the regions.
Azerbaijan? No, I wouldn't want that. Importing goods from Azerbaijan. Never.
After all, we all make mistakes. Armenian mistakes are no less significant. And it seems to me there is quite a lot of blood in or on our hands as well.
In my opinion, the Americans proposed this, the Trump route. It suits us, and our government has agreed because it really brings us a lot of benefit.
I am much more in favor, of course, of Armenia having closer ties with the West.
A warm welcome back. Now let's head to our correspondents around the world. The EU says Russia must withdraw from occupied territories, including Georgia, as part of any lasting peace settlement. Our correspondent in Tbilisi has more.
The European Union is formally calling on Russia to withdraw its military forces from occupied territories, including those in Georgia, as part of its core conditions for achieving lasting peace on the continent. EU High Representative Kaja Kallas confirms that she has shared this position with the EU member states. She stated that Russia must respect its existing international obligations, which already require the withdrawal of troops from territories it occupies. According to Kallas, Russia is currently failing to comply with at least 30 such agreements. She specifically names Georgia and Moldova as countries where Russia has long-standing commitments to withdraw forces. The EU position also applies more broadly, including Russian military presence linked to the war in Ukraine, as well as deployments connected to security arrangements in Belarus and Armenia. Kallas acknowledges that some observers consider these demands difficult to achieve. She says directly that such requirements may sound unrealistic. However, she also states that Russia's own demands in negotiations are unrealistic, including attempts to secure territory through political pressure rather than military control. According to her, the EU's goal is to rebalance negotiations and focus on the core issue, Russia's continued military presence in neighboring states. For Georgia, this places its occupied territories firmly within the wider European security agenda. The issue of Russian troop withdrawal is now formally linked to discussions about ending the war in Ukraine and establishing long-term regional stability. The Georgian government says it would welcome any real progress. Georgian Dream member Irakli Kadagishvili stated that if international efforts lead to concrete steps toward the occupation, this would, of course, be positive for Georgia. But at the same time, he notes that it remains unclear what practical mechanisms will follow. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Kazakhstan is stepping up efforts to study and protect the Caspian Sea as environmental pressure on the region continues to grow. Our very own Fariza Kalamazina reports now from Almaty.
Kazakhstan has allocated $2.2 million to study and protect the Caspian Sea as environmental risks in the region continue to grow. The funding has been directed to the Kazakh Research Institute of the Caspian Sea. The money will be used to buy new equipment for marine monitoring and to upgrade laboratory facilities. This will allow scientists to move beyond limited studies and carry out regular on-site monitoring of the sea, tracking changes in weather conditions, marine life and water quality. Government officials say the investment will strengthen scientific capacity and improve understanding of what is happening in Kazakhstan's part of the Caspian Sea. This, in turn, is expected to support better and more effective environmental protection decisions. The Institute focuses on major environmental challenges in the Caspian Sea, including the condition of fish stocks and the causes of seal death. Scientists are also studying changes in water levels, climate impacts, and overall water quality. The Caspian Sea is a unique ecosystem and one of the world's largest inland bodies of water. It plays an important role in regional biodiversity and economic stability. For Kazakhstan, its importance is especially high. The country has the longest Caspian coastline, stretching 2,320 kilometers, more than any other coastal state. At the same time, scientists warn that the sea level continues to fall. By 2050, it could reach minus 33 meters. A level of minus 28.5 meters is already considered critical, both for the ecosystem and for maritime economic activity. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Nearly 3 million Afghans have returned to the country in 2025, with deportations from neighbouring states driving much of that movement, according to a new report from the United Nations Refugee Agency. A News correspondent Tamim Bahis reports now from Kabul.
According to UNHCR's one-year recap report, 2.9 million Afghans returned to Afghanistan in 2025, including 1.9 million from Iran and 1 million from Pakistan. Deportations accounted for a large share of the total. Around 1.4 million people were forcibly returned, with 1.26 million from Iran and 155,000 from Pakistan. What is particularly striking is the profile of those returning. Many families had lived in neighboring countries for decades, and a large number of children were born outside Afghanistan. UNHCR says most did not leave voluntarily. 73% of returnees from Iran and 61% from Pakistan said they had no choice in returning. Inside Afghanistan, conditions remain extremely fragile. Post-return monitoring found 88% of households are in debt, 63% face food insecurity, and nearly half of children are out of school. Women and girls are described as particularly vulnerable, facing restrictions on movements and limited access to livelihoods. UNHCR says it has scaled up assistance, with nearly 700,000 people receiving protection support and close to 500,000 receiving cash assistance during 2025. But the agency warns that the scale of returns is placing enormous pressure on border facilities and communities of return. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
And finally tonight, as Azerbaijan marks Water Tuesday, the first sign that winter is giving way to spring. It's a reminder that renewal often begins quietly. Traditions like these speak not just to heritage, but to continuity, resilience and hope. From all of us here, that's Prime Time. Good night.